welcome to Julie Reads Her Bookshelf. I'm Julie. For those of you who are new here, this is a channel where I read through all of the unread books on my bookshelf until I reach 0. And it's time for another monthly wrap up. I can't believe we're at the beginning of August already. So July was a booktube event called Jane Austen July, an extremely popular one. And I didn't really actively participate in it because I decided that I was not going to follow any of the prompts, not because they weren't good prompts, but rather I had realized that I haven't read all of Jane Austen's completed published works. And I thought that rather than trying to fit my reading around the prompts for Jane Austen July, I would actually just read through the 2 unread books that I have of Jane Austen so that I can say that I read all of her major works. And those 2 books are Mansfield Park and Persuasion. So I had a really interesting month of reading through the late stages of Jane Austen's writing career and her life. And it was a really interesting experience because I would say that late Jane Austen is a little bit different from her earlier books. There's quite a strong theme of moralism and also religion in a way that comes through that I didn't quite pick up in her earlier books. Having said that, I really enjoyed both of them. I liked one considerably more than the other, but the first one I read was Mansfield Park. Now, for those who don't know, I assume you all know the main storylines of the Jane Austen novels, but Mansfield Park revolves around the central character, Fanny Price. Fanny comes from a poor family and she's sent to live with her wealthy relatives, the Bertrams, at their estate called Mansfield Park. Now, Fanny has this kind of real sense of inferiority when she arrives at Mansfield Park. Everyone around her is used to this level of luxury and sophistication, and she comes off as quite shabby and decidedly a poor relation. And that experience completely destroys her self-confidence. The only person who sort of treats her with respect and with kindness is her cousin Edmund, who really looks out for her and then eventually becomes her main love interest. The whole like marrying your cousin thing is a bit weird, but we'll just ignore that because it was a different time. So as Fanny then grows into a young woman, she becomes this interested observer of the life and the behaviors around Mansfield Park. So particularly when Henry and Mary Crawford, a pair of siblings, arrive at Mansfield Park, the Crawfords become this real object of flirtation and interest for all of the young people at Mansfield Park, including Edmund, who sort of falls in love with Mary Crawford. And the novel then unfolds around the lives of these young people and what they get up to. What I really liked about it was this element of class, which was really subtly done. I enjoyed the way Fanny slowly blossomed into a young woman. She integrated herself into the family, and it was really rewarding actually to watch her relationship with her uncle, Sir Thomas, evolve to the point where she really becomes a bit of a second daughter to him, a third daughter, I should say. So I really like the coming of age element of this story. I didn't really buy the central romance. It's probably the least romantic of all of Jane Austen's novels. And I also really didn't like the kind of moralistic and judgy tone of the novel. And it's interesting because this is probably the only novel where I find there's that real sense of moralism, and which makes Fanny Price probably the least likable for me of all of Jane Austen's protagonists. Onto the second book I read, which is Persuasion. Now, this was a weird one because I think in many ways Anne Elliot, the main heroine in Persuasion, is quite similar to Fanny Price. They're both quite reserved characters. They both spend a lot of their time observing the people around them. but in some ways, Anne Elliot is a lot more likable than Fanny Price, and I haven't quite put my finger on why. I'd be interested to hear your thoughts on that. So Persuasion, as I said, follows the life of Anne Elliot. The novel starts with quite a bit of backstory. So 8 years before the principal events in the novel, Anne meets Frederick Wentworth, who was a young naval officer, and she becomes secretly engaged to him. They fall in love, but she was persuaded to break off that engagement by her friend, mostly because of Wentworth's lack of wealth and social standing. And when the novel begins, Anne is in her late 20s. She is still unmarried. Her family comes upon some hard times. They're sort of minor nobility, and they're in a bit of financial strife. So they rent out their ancestral home to Admiral Croft, who ends up being Wentworth's brother-in-law. And then through that lease meets Wentworth again, and those feelings that she had for him from 8 years ago are rekindled. And as the title suggests, their persuasion becomes one of the main themes of the novel. And the novel really looks at the way persuasion and a sense of capacity to be persuaded from your kind of gut instinct can affect a person's choices and ultimately their happiness. I found this book to be a little bit different to Jane Austen's other books, predominantly because I think there's a sense of kind of regret and sadness that permeates the book that I didn't find in her other novels. It's probably to do also with the fact that so this book was published posthumously, and it was probably the last book Jane Austen wrote. So there's a sense of maturity about it that doesn't come forth in her earlier works. What I really loved about this book was this theme of redemption and second chances that comes across. I really love Anne Elliot as a character. As I said, she's quite similar to Fanny in a lot of ways, but she comes across as considerably less judgy. She's refreshingly honest about her own feelings, and the relationship between Wentworth and Anne has a real maturity about it. Anne's father and sister kind of come across as really annoying, but they do add a bit of contrast and also comic relief sometimes to the novel. So overall, I actually really love this. It would probably be one of my favorite Jane Austen books. So having now read all of Jane Austen, all of her major finished works, I think my favorite is still Emma, followed by Persuasion. So this ranks pretty highly on my list. I might one day do a ranking of all my favorite of all of Jane Austen's works from my favorite to least favorite. But so far, I'm pretty sure Emma is still my favorite out of all of them. Hi everyone, excuse the sudden change in outfit. As I was filming last time, which was a few days ago, I got a phone call, and by the time I finished the phone call, it was sort of too dark to film. So I'm coming back to finish off my July wrap up today. So after I read the two Jane Austens in July, I decided that I wanted something very different. I generally try to mix up my kind of fiction versus non-fiction reading. I'm predominantly a fiction reader, but I do consistently read non-fiction, if not every month, then at least every second month. So I had a look on my unread non-fiction shelf, and I thought it's time that I tackle Freakonomics by Stephen Levitt and Stephen Dubner, two Stephens. This book I've had for a long time, and I've never read it because it's almost become one of those books that's entered popular lexicon. The idea of Freakonomics and using economics thinking to approach other social problems. And I think it's partly due to the fact that the two Stephens are very, very good at marketing this book, and along with the podcast, along with updated versions and Freakonomics in other settings. So they're very, very good at taking this winning formula that they had in writing this book and applying it more broadly and staying within the conversation. So I had very little incentive then to kind of go back to the original work, but I thought it was time, and I really was craving something different from this kind of Regency England and Jane Austen's world. So off I went to popular economics. Now, the premise of this book, if you didn't know, was to use data analysis and economic principles to examine a wide range of topics that on their surface seem unrelated, but are interconnected in some way once you actually drill down to the data. They cover topics like, what do school teachers and sumo wrestlers have in common? Does legalization of abortion lead to decrease in crime? Now that's a really uncomfortable topic and really uncomfortable reading, regardless of what your views are on abortion. They also look at things like, real estate agents having something in common with the KKK. And they'll also delve into that concept of information asymmetry and how it can affect transactions as well as social dynamics within organizations. And the final two chapters of this book, which I found particularly fascinating, was around the role of parents and the role of parenting in producing a good outcome in children. So overall, it was a pretty entertaining book. It was a very quick read. I think I got through it in about 2 days, and that was not with any significant investment of time on my part. I'm so used to having spent most of last year reading Russians and most of this year reading Victorians. I'm so used to a much denser form of writing that comes up in kind of more of your classical literature, and so suddenly reading kind of popular economics, just the writing feels quite lightweight, if you know what I mean. But it was entertaining. Or was it mind-blowing? No, but the book gave me a lot of food for thought, particularly in the way that it dealt with the difference between correlation and causation as concepts. So correlation is when two things come up at the same time and they might be correlated, whereas causation is where one thing causes the other. The difference between cause and effect in it. And as a lawyer, I'm constantly thinking about causation because most of the cases I deal with, something happens, a client suffers harm or loss, and we need to figure out what caused the loss, which isn't always so easy to identify. So I was fascinated by kind of their view on the difference between correlation and causation, and looking at it from a more of an economics angle, and I found that particularly thought-provoking. So overall, 3 books read in July off my unread shelf. We have Freakonomics, popular economics, that was entertaining but not exactly life-changing. We have Persuasion, probably one of my more preferred Austens, and we have Mansfield Park, not my favorite, but I did enjoy reading it. Not a bad month. We started off July with 74 unread books, and so taking off 3, we are currently at 71, so close to the 60s. And of course, when I hit 69, I'll be able to buy a book, because for every 20 books I read off my unread shelf, I am permitted to buy 1 book. So I'm going to think about what book I get to buy to celebrate taking 20 books off the initial number that I started with, which was 90. So happy reading. I will see you probably in a few weeks before I leave on an overseas trip in September. In August, I will be trying to read some Greek and Turkish literature, because I'm heading off to Greece and Turkey in September. So I look forward to doing that and to chatting to you guys about it. And otherwise, enjoy the last of your summer if you're in the Northern Hemisphere. And if you are in the Southern Hemisphere like myself, enjoy your unseasonably warm and disturbingly warm winter. And I'll see you in a few weeks.